He already knew that sound. The quick footsteps, the door slamming, the muffled screams coming from the house next door. It was always like that. But that afternoon, it was different. The dry thud of a body falling to the ground made the veteran get up. Through the window, he saw the young man pushing his own mother. And then, the silence. The kind of silence that hurts. The boy left the house kicking a can, his eyes red, his expression one of anger and abandonment. The neighborhood pretended not to see. But he, a war veteran, could not ignore it. The next day, he waited for him at the gate. "Kid, can I tell you something?" What he said there, "You need to listen." The boy stopped for a second, hesitated, looked at the ground as if he carried the weight of 1,000 guilts. The veteran did not raise his voice, did not judge. He simply spoke with the firmness of someone who has seen the world fall apart and still remained standing. "You talked about choices, about paths that have no return, about how sometimes what seems like freedom is just another form of prison." The young man just listened, not a word, and then he walked away, without looking back. The next day, it disappeared. Empty house. Absolute silence. The gate next door never opened again, and the veteran never had peace again. Sometimes, a conversation can save a life, but it can also haunt the person who had it. Have you ever been through something like this? Have you ever felt like you could have done more for someone? If this part of the story touched you, leave a comment below with what touched you the most. Your experience, your perspective. All of this can help other people who are also watching right now. And if you believe that stories like this deserve to be told, like the video and subscribe to the channel. It is your participation that keeps this flame alive, that makes more people find messages like this, full of truth, pain, and hope. Time passed, the pain remained. But what the veteran didn't imagine was what was about to happen years later. The mornings were always the same. The sound of the old clock, the creak of the porch chair, the smell of weak coffee made out of habit, not desire. The house next door remained empty, with the weeds growing slowly, as if nature itself had also given up waiting for anyone. The veteran stared at that locked door, as if waiting for a ghost to appear. He didn't tell anyone, but deep down, he believed that perhaps the boy had died. Life is like that. When an angry young man disappears, the news almost always comes in the newspaper, or from someone whispering, "Did you hear?" But nothing. No news, no body, no rumor. Just silence. And that silence hurt. He carried on his shoulders the burden of 1,000 decisions, but none haunted him as much as those words spoken at the gate. They came back like cursed echoes in the longest nights. "You're just running away." Maybe he had been too harsh. Maybe that boy just needed a hug. But he wasn't good at that. He never was. In the war, he had learned to act, not to console. And now, decades later, he was paying the price for having tried to teach what he couldn't say with sweetness. Guilt grew like rust on a forgotten gate. Every day, he became more convinced that, yes, the boy could be gone forever. Maybe I would have taken the worst path. Maybe he was somewhere in the world, imprisoned, injured, or dead, and all because he wanted to advise. Who did he think he was? A forgotten hero trying to save a world that had already moved on without him? Old neighbors are gone, children playing in the street have grown up and moved away. Only he was left. And that fence. That damn fence! Dividing his life between what was and what could have been. There were days when he didn't even leave the house, just so he wouldn't see the emptiness next door. The void that screamed. Even his old friends were leaving. A heart attack here, another cancer there, and the weekly get-togethers at the corner cafe began to disappear. And along with them, the smiles, the war stories, the bitter jokes, and the memories that made the loneliness seem a little more bearable. It was as if everything was being taken away, little by little. As if life was erasing its traces. One of those silent mornings, he had a nightmare. He was on the battlefield again. But this time, it wasn't a wounded comrade he was trying to save. It was the boy. He was kneeling, handcuffed, bloodied, begging for help with his eyes. But he couldn't move. His entire body was paralyzed. He woke up sweating, with his breath caught in his chest and his throat dry as sand. He sat up in bed and stayed there, staring into space, feeling the weight of something that never said goodbye. The veteran no longer knew if he was waiting for an answer or just trying to survive the regret. He started writing letters. I never sent it. I just wrote. As if putting the words on paper could wash away the pain. If I had said it differently. If I had given more time. They were letters addressed to a name he never quite knew. A boy who lived next door and disappeared the day after the most difficult conversation of his life. Perhaps this is the greatest burden of loneliness. Not knowing if you lost someone. Or if you were the one who pushed that person away. Time, that cruel judge, seemed not to want to answer. It just left the veteran there, remembering, brooding, waiting. Do you know that feeling? Of carrying something for years and not knowing if you did it right or wrong? Comment below. I felt that too. Because sometimes all we need is to know that we're not alone on this crooked road called life. And no matter how hard he tried to move forward, every path led him back to that fence. The barrier between what he was and what he stopped being. A soldier without a war. An advisor without an answer. A man trying to find peace within a silence that screamed louder than any explosion. But it was on one of those cloudy days, when he no longer expected anything from life, that something changed. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a phone call. It was a sound. A simple sound. Shoes hitting the concrete floor. Firm steps. Rhythmic. They weren't of a child running around, nor of a distracted neighbor. They were the steps of someone who knows where they are going, from someone who learned to walk with purpose. And that made his heart stop for a second. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You still have a lot that needs to be said. There is a hidden truth that has not yet come to light. And there is a journey hidden between sorrows and revelations that will show that some seeds flourish, even if they take decades to sprout. The veteran's shaking hands took longer to fold the clothes. The body no longer responded as firmly as before. His legs were wobbly, and the cane, which had previously been a sporadic support, was now an obligatory extension of his walk. At every step, a memory. With each memory, a wound that would not heal. I didn't receive any more visits. The old battalion colleagues left, one by one. First Joe, then Ramirez, and finally Carter, the last one who still sent him Christmas cards. The phone rang little, and when it rang, it was a mistake. Or propaganda. Routine became survival. Coffee heated in the microwave, stale bread from the day before, the TV on without sound. The house, previously filled with voices and footsteps, now echoed the noise of its own walls. But not even the creaking of the wooden floor was able to muffle the pain that lived inside him, because there was one name he never forgot. A face that kept coming back, year after year, as if time had frozen that moment at the gate. He tried not to think, but everything around him screamed. The fence was still there. The bushes behind it grew haphazardly, almost like a living frame for an unresolved past. Sometimes he caught himself standing there, staring at that empty space, as if at any moment the boy would appear out of nowhere, laughing or crying, saying he was back. But that never happened. On one of the coldest nights of that winter, the veteran woke up sweating. The nightmare had been cruel. In the dream, he was back on the battlefield. But it wasn't soldiers screaming. It was the boy, on his knees, hands clasped behind his back, begging for help. And he couldn't move. Not a muscle. He woke up with the scream stuck in his throat and tears streaming down his eyes. He went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, said out loud, "I failed him." That phrase echoed inside him for weeks. The veteran began writing letters as a way to ease his mind. He wrote as if he were talking to the boy, He didn't know if he was alive, dead, or in prison. He just knew he needed to get it out. If you're reading this, I want to apologize for not listening before I spoke, for judging you when I should have welcomed you, for trying to be someone's hero when I could barely be my own. He wrote these words with shaking hands, the writing almost illegible, but with an emotional clarity that hurt. He kept the letters in a wooden box, along with some medals, newspaper clippings, and the photo of the platoon that survived its last mission. Every time I opened that box, I felt an even greater emptiness. Because amidst so many tests of bravery, the most important thing was missing, rescuing that boy. And what hurt the most was that no one around knew. No one imagined that the old man walking slowly down the sidewalk was carrying an entire battlefield in his chest. That each step he took was a silent apology. That his silence was not laziness or bad mood. It was mourning. I mourned for someone who might not even be dead. For years, he avoided talking to his new neighbors. It wasn't out of rudeness. It was out of fear. Fear of getting attached again. Fear of trying to help and ending up hurting them. Fear of seeing history repeat itself. Because when you fail someone who needed you, it's hard to trust even your own voice. Until one ordinary afternoon, when he was sitting on the porch with the newspaper open in his hands, without reading a single line, something happened. A sound I haven't heard in a long time. Steps. Heavy, firm, rhythmic footsteps. Not those of a child running, nor of a car parking. It was different. Each thud against the ground seemed to carry a purpose. As if that sound brought with it a piece of the answer he had been waiting for years. He tried to get up quickly, but his knee wouldn't let him. Leaning on his cane, he walked to the gate. He opened it slowly, as if time was testing his courage. And then, you see, the silhouette of a man walking towards you. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't a mailman. It wasn't anyone I knew. But the eyes were the same. The same ones he saw filled with rage that day so many years ago. The same ones who stared at him in silence, carrying pain and contempt. But now, they had something new. Tenderness, respect, and a quiet but deep regret. The veteran was breathless for a moment, and before he could say anything, the man stopped, carefully took off his cap, placed it on his chest, and said, "Sir, do you recognize me?" Comment. This story touched me. So I know you too carry memories that never went away. The song playing on the radio was the same one he had last heard on a muddy field in Vietnam, as he held the hand of a wounded comrade who would not come home. It was as if the past decided to visit him all at once. The music, the rain, the smell of wet earth, all mixed together in an instant that made his chest ache. He stood slowly, his knees creaking like hinges too tired to hold up one more memory. Standing, he stared at the rotting fence. Each chip of that wood seemed like a piece of time that would never come back, of words that were never answered, of decisions that he didn't know if they were right or cowardly. The rain grew heavier. The wind lifted the leaves from the ground. But he didn't move. He stood there, motionless, as if waiting for a reckoning. And then the footsteps came. At first, it seemed like something in his head, but they grew clearer, rhythmic, like the sound of a military parade coming from a distant time. His heart raced, as if it had forgotten how to beat properly. He gripped his cane tightly. He looked towards the gate. And there it was, a tall man in uniform, with a firm expression and his eyes protected under the brim of his cap. The veteran felt his legs weaken, but not from age. It was from memory. Because that face carried features he hadn't seen in over 20 years. The same eyes, the same discreet scar above the eyebrow, the same silence. The man took off his cap, placed it on his chest, and said, in a choked but controlled voice, "Sir, do you recognize me?" The veteran felt a lump rise in his throat. For an instant, everything around him seemed to disappear. The sound of the rain, the pain in his back, the loneliness of the years. Only that moment existed. Their gazes locked like a missing link being reconnected. And then, slowly, he nodded. "You're back." The man smiled, but his eyes were teary. And it was only then that the veteran noticed. The uniform was wet, but clean. The boots, polished, and at chest height. Medals. Medals of honor, service, bravery. Symbols of a transformation he never imagined he would witness. They didn't hug. There was no rush, just respect. They went in together. The veteran offered coffee, even though he knew there was only lukewarm water in the pot. They sat at the kitchen table, where he used to write his unsent letters. And there, between silent sips and heavy glances, came the first sentence. "That night I ran away, but your words have followed me every day of my life." The veteran remained silent. He didn't know whether to smile or cry. But inside, something was beginning to move. A piece that seemed lost finally fell into place. "I didn't go to jail. I went straight to the base. I asked to enlist the next day. No one understood. Not even my mother. But I understood. It was that, or I would be lost forever." His voice was shaking, but there was firmness in his words. He spoke of hard training, hungry nights, discipline that seemed like punishment. But he also spoke of reconnecting. With his own mind, with his own worth, with the idea that there was still time to be a better person. The veteran listened to everything in silence, as if each word was medicine and wound at the same time. Because he didn't know. He didn't know that that seed had sprouted. "I didn't know I had saved a life." And now, that truth crushed him with force and relief. But no one knew what that man was carrying in his coat pocket. He reached in, pulled out a small leather case, and pushed it across the table. "This here was for my daughter. But I want you to keep it." The veteran opened it slowly. Inside was a medal engraved with the words, "For leadership and inspiration." It was simple, but heavy. As heavy as the years he had spent believing he had failed. "This medal is yours, because you were the one who taught me the first lesson that matters, that running away is easy, but honoring a chance is for the few." The old man didn't answer. He just squeezed his eyes shut. He let a tear fall, and for the first time in 2 decades. He breathed without guilt, but there was still more. The visitor looked out the window, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and whispered, "There's someone waiting outside. Someone who really wants to meet the man who saved her father." The veteran turned around slowly. Through the crack in the curtain, he saw a parked car, a woman, 2 children, and a little dog, wagging its tail with the same excitement he himself felt when he returned home after the war. He didn't know what to say. It was all too big. As if life had suddenly decided to give him the outcome he never dared ask for. But there was still a conversation to be finished. Something still pulsed there. One last piece of the story that needed to be told. Because not every hero wears a uniform, and not every soldier fights on the battlefield. Write in the comments, "Justice comes with time." If this touched you, it is because you too carry something that is still waiting to be healed. The ground was soaked, and yet the young man knelt down without hesitation. Water dripped from the cap he held close to his chest, as if each drop washed away the weight of 2 decades. The veteran felt his heart racing, not because of his age, but because of everything that moment meant. The words he heard seemed impossible. He had dreamed them so many times, but he never thought he would actually hear them. "Every word of yours haunted me, but today it guides me." It tore him apart inside. It was as if, finally, everything had made sense. The war he had waged after the war, the one against regret, against forgetting, against time, was finally showing signs of surrender. But it wasn't just emotion. It was impact. Because there, kneeling before him, was a living symbol of the transformation he thought was impossible. The boy he thought was lost had returned as a grown man. And more than that, as a respected officer. He wanted to say something. Anything. But his throat was tight. His chest felt too small for so much pent-up emotion. All he could do was reach out, trembling, and touch him on the shoulder. The young man looked up, his eyes red, and smiled. A shy, broken smile, as if he were still asking for forgiveness for having disappeared without explanation. They stayed like that for a few seconds, frozen in time, until the veteran finally managed to speak. His voice was low, almost hoarse. "I thought you were dead." The young man nodded, as if he understood the weight of those words. "And I almost died, but a voice, yours, pushed me forward." They entered together without saying anything else. The old man held the gate tightly, still not believing that it was real. The cane tapped rhythmically on the wet floor as they climbed the 2 steps to the porch. Inside the house, the smell of old wood and stale coffee filled the air. Nothing had changed. The furniture was the same. The radio was still on top of the refrigerator. The chair where he wrote his letters was still there, with the notebook propped up against the back. The young man took off his coat and stood, looking around. "I remembered this house. I thought it was smaller." The veteran replied with a short smile. People were miners. They sat at the table. The old man poured 2 glasses of water. It was all he had at that moment, and perhaps it was all he needed. Silence, presence, recognition. The young man then opened his wallet and took out a folded photo. He placed it on the table. "This is my daughter. Her name is Hope." The veteran looked. It was a little girl of about 5 years old, wearing a blue dress and a big smile. "I wanted to give it that name because one day someone had hope for me." The tears flowed effortlessly. The old man lowered his head, clutching the photo in his hands as if holding a piece of his own heart. It wasn't just a reunion. It was the revelation of a legacy, a side effect of the good he had tried to do, even without knowing how. "She always asks me who was the man who changed my life. I used to say it was someone from the past, but today, she will know his face." The pain of those 20 years has not gone away, but she reorganized herself. It stopped being a guilt and became part of the journey. Like a scar that doesn't go away, but proves that the skin resisted. The veteran struggled to his feet and walked over to an old drawer. He took out a yellowed envelope with several handwritten letters. He placed it on the table. "These are for you. I used to write them, but I never knew where to send them." The young man looked surprised. He opened one of the sheets. He recognized the shaky handwriting, the frank words. "You said everything here. You even called me son in some of them." The old man smiled, unashamed of his emotion. "Because that's what you were, even without knowing it." Time seemed to stop again, but this time not because of pain, because of relief. The young man pulled the envelope delicately, as if holding a relic, and then he stood up. "There's someone else out there, and I think she'd like to give you a hug." The veteran followed him with short steps. The cane hit the ground more firmly now, as if it supported not only the body, but also the courage. Outside, the rain had let up. The clouds slowly parted, revealing a clear sky that looked freshly painted. And there, leaning against the car, a woman with a serene expression was holding a child's hand. When she saw the veteran, the little girl ran to him without hesitation and clung to his leg as if she already knew him. "Are you Daddy's grandpa?" he asked, with the most disarming innocence in the world. He didn't answer. He just crouched down, with effort, and hugged her back. The old soldier who once believed he had lost his mission now understood that his greatest victory was there, alive, smiling, and calling him family. And the most curious thing is that that day wasn't over yet. Comment there. There are stories that save. If you felt something at that moment, it's because you know that the right words at the right time can change destinies. The smell of old coffee still hung in the air, but now, mixed with the soft perfume coming from the woman who had just entered, everything seemed different. She approached with timid steps, teary eyes, and a smile that carried more gratitude than words could explain. Behind her, 2 little ones, a boy and a girl, looked curiously at the man with a firm expression and moist eyes. The girl was holding a doll, the boy a metal toy car. Neither of them said anything, but they both felt that this moment was special. It was as if, even so young, they understood that this white-haired man, sitting at the table with a tired posture, had done something big. Something that had changed the course of their lives, even if they couldn't explain how. The veteran tried to get up, but his leg gave out. The son-in-law ran over and held him tightly, as if that gesture was also part of an apology. Or maybe a silent thank you. The old man looked into the woman's eyes, then into the children's. For an instant, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. The future. He, who lived trapped in the past, who carried the burden of losses, mistakes, and silences, now saw a new generation before him. Not as an audience, but as continuity. The woman took a child's notebook out of her bag, covered in rough drawings and unaccented sentences. She handed it to the veteran with delicacy. "They wanted to give you this." The old man opened the notebook with trembling hands. There was a drawing of a house, a tree, a man in uniform with a child beside him, and written in colored pencil, the sentence, "You are Daddy's hero." He brought his hand to his face, not to wipe away a tear, but to contain a cry that came from deep within, accumulated by years of silence, remorse, and loneliness. "I'm not a hero," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "Yes, it is," said the grandson, with the naturalness of someone who has no doubts. And in that simplicity, something inside him broke. Or, maybe, finally healed. They all sat down at the table. The family, once fragmented by grief, was now reunited by the reunion. They laughed, talked, and ate hard biscuits that had been stored away since the neighbor's last visit. The girl danced. The boy showed off his toy car. And the veteran, who had spent years in silence, now heard voices inside the house again. But there was more. Because the young man, the boy who had become a man, still carried something inside him that needed to be said. Something he had carried not in his pockets, but in his soul. "I wanted to show you something." He took out his phone, unlocked the screen, and showed a picture. It was a classroom. Children sat on simple chairs, with an American flag in the background. "After I got out of the army, I volunteered as an instructor. I teach boys like me. Boys who grew up without a father. Boys who are angry, who are scared, just like I was. And every time I talk to them, I tell them about the day an old warrior stopped me at the gate and said, 'Do you think pain justifies violence?'" The veteran nodded, moved. He didn't need any further explanation. That was enough. He understood that his mission had not ended with the war, nor with the reunion. It was alive, multiplied, reaching places he had never dreamed of. The young man's wife interrupted him with a smile. "When he's tired and thinks about giving up, you know what he does. He opens that medal and remembers you." The old man looked at the medal still on the table. It gleamed in the dim light of the old lamp as if it had been polished by the afternoon rain. He reached out, touched it gently, and for the first time in a long time, he felt worthy of it. The girl approached once more, now with a book in her hand. "So, Grandpa, can you tell a story from the war?" He smiled at the corner of his lips. "I can, but today I'm going to tell you another one." Everyone settled down. The children sat on the carpet, the mother on the sofa, the young man next to the father he chose. And the veteran began. "Once upon a time, there was an angry boy, an old fence and an open gate. And there, in that simple house, a new chapter began. Not made of pain, nor of silence, but healing, of transformation, of legacy. Because sometimes the biggest battle is not against the enemy out there, but against the belief that no one can change. And when someone believes in you, even if just for a moment, it can rewrite everything." Write in the comments, "Hope still lives." If you've come this far, it's because you also carry something inside you that deserves to start over. And that changes everything. The sun that morning was different. Not because it was warmer or brighter, but because it seemed to have been designed for that specific moment. The veteran was sitting on the porch with the newspaper open on his lap, without reading a single line. The sound of laughter came from the backyard. The children ran among the leaves, competing to see who could find the biggest stone, while the young man carefully mowed the lawn. It was a simple scene, but to him, it was like seeing a new flag being raised after a long war. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to contain his emotions. Every detail of that newfound routine was precious. The smell of lunch coming from the kitchen, the sound of scissors cutting dry leaves, the sound of the girl counting to 10 to play hide and seek. It was all so different from the last few years, when the only thing you could hear was the ticking of the clock on the wall and the sigh of someone who had given up on waiting. Now there was life, presence, hope. But there was also a restlessness, a soft weight that built up inside, like a letter that needed to be written before time sealed the envelope on its own. The veteran knew. He didn't say anything, but he knew. The body began to give clearer signs that the farewell was not as far away as it would have liked. The legs hurt more. Sleep was lighter, and the tiredness didn't go away even after hours in silence. One afternoon, after telling the children an old war story, one of those he usually kept to himself, he entered the room slowly, as if carrying a secret. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened the dresser drawer. He took out a wooden box, the same one that kept letters, medals, and newspaper clippings yellowed by time. But this time, he added something new. A ticket, written by hand, with shaky but firm writing. For when I'm no longer here. He folded the paper carefully, placed it inside the box, and closed it calmly. He knew he didn't need to say anything, because the most important thing had already been said. Not in words, but in actions, in presence, in looking, in listening. The next day, he asked the young man to accompany him to the school where he taught. It was a simple building, with faded paint and cracked courts. But inside lived young people who still bore the same marks that he saw in the boy 20 years ago. Rebellion, abandonment, anger, fear. When he entered the room, all the eyes of the students turned to him. Some curious, others suspicious. And then there was silence. The veteran took a deep breath, looked at the whiteboard full of crooked notes, and said, "Some of you will think that no one cares about what you are going through. And maybe you are right. For now. But I want to tell you something. Sometimes just one person who believes in you is all it takes." The room went silent. One of the boys crossed his arms. Another tried to look away, but couldn't. The veteran then pointed to the instructor. "That man there was just like you. Lost, angry, thinking the world owed him something. And today, he's a father, an instructor, and the most honorable man I've ever met." The young man lowered his eyes, trying to contain his emotion. He hadn't expected to hear that, but inside him, something reorganized itself. Because hearing that from the man who rescued him, it was like completing a cycle. The veteran returned home quieter than usual. He sat in the living room armchair and watched the children playing with the figurines they had found in the toolbox. He smiled, but with a distant look, not of sadness, of contemplation, like someone who is seeing, for the first time, what he has built without realizing it. One rainy night, he asked the young man to stay a little later. He wanted to talk. They sat on the porch, as they always did. The rain beat lightly on the tin roof. He looked at the sky for long minutes, then turned and said, "I think I found my last mission, and it's complete." The young man was silent. He wanted to say something, but he felt that any words would break the reverence of the moment. The veteran continued, "Anyone can teach someone to shoot, but teaching someone to have the courage to change course, that's another war." Those words hung in the air. And even after the silence returned, nothing felt empty. On the contrary, it was as if everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. At the end of that night, the veteran went to bed early. He slept with a serene smile, as if he had finally rested from a long mission. And no one knew. But in his shirt pocket, he kept something special. An old uniform button, lost during the war, which he found years later at the bottom of a box. It was his amulet. And that night, he wanted to sleep with it close to his chest. What would come next was not yet written. But one thing was certain: the legacy was already alive. And it would continue even after the names were forgotten. Because what is built with truth never fades away. Comment here. Missions like this never die. If you understood what this reunion meant, it is because, deep down, it also carries something that deserves to be transmitted. And that makes all the difference. If you've come this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. And maybe, just like the veteran, you're also carrying something that's still waiting to be healed, or perhaps reconnected. If this message found a place in your heart, leave a comment below with the phrase, "There are still battles worth fighting," just so I know you stayed with me until the end. If this kind of story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. Here, we relive what the world has forgotten. And each new video can be a new memory, a new reflection, or even a new beginning. Oh, and leave your like too. Not only because it helps the channel, but because it shows that you really felt something in this encounter. There is a video here on the side that complements everything you experienced with me today. Click and continue there. There are still many stories that deserve to be told,